G'day everyone, Matt from MileMarker66 here again. I've been really looking forward to today's video. We're going to do a whole brisket. Now I know brisket's probably not a cut you go to, it's your first choice when you get into low and slow barbecue, but sooner or later you're going to have to put on your big boy pants and give one a go. The first thing to point out with the brisket is, while we don't necessarily expect that every backyard barbecue cook's going to go out and spend $150 on a brisket, you really do get what you pay for. So I think if you are going for quality, you're going to be far more likely to get better results than you will perhaps if you didn't want to spend quite as much money. That's not to say you can't cook a good brisket that way, but if there was any advice I was going to give on buying a brisket to anyone, that would be it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do when we get our brisket out of our packaging is trim it up. The first thing you'll notice is that on this side here, you'll see it's slightly uneven and rises up at one end, and if you turn it over, you'll see that this bottom side here is all one flat muscle. So what we're going to do for today's cook is we're going to treat this side here as the top of our brisket. And you'll see that there's quite a big layer of hard white fat here. We want to go ahead and trim all that off. So that's the first thing we're going to do. When you're trimming, I recommend a boning knife is a really good tool for this. They're quite small and easy to handle. And so long as you keep them nice and sharp, they're a great tool for trimming brisket or any other meat for that matter. Okay, so you'll see that now that we've trimmed back some of the surface fat, you can see the grain of the meat. So what you want to try and do is, when you're trimming this back, follow that same grain. So I'm just taking off the hard surface fat, and also there's little bits of silver skin you can see here. And that's so that we can allow our rub to penetrate. The other thing you'll notice too is if you look down this side here, you'll see there's a bit of grey meat here. So we'll probably just get our knife and slice that right off. So now that we've trimmed all the surface fat on, you can see here we've actually got two different muscles. We've got this muscle that sits on the top here with the grain running this way, and this is called the point, or sometimes the decal. And you've got your other muscle here with the grain running this way, and this is the flat. The flat is generally where you'll get your slices from, and the point is lovely and fatty and full of flavour, so that's also really great. So the competition guys will generally separate these two muscles, but just for the home cook we're going to leave them on. Another point to note with the grain is that when slicing brisket, we'll generally use the grain of the flat as our reference rather than the grain of the point, even though they do run in separate directions. And when we slice our meat, we want to make sure we're slicing across or at 90 degrees to the grain. So in this case, you can see the grain of the flat goes in this direction, therefore our slices want to come this way. Now, a little tip, if you can't remember at the end of the cook which way your grain's gone because you put the rub on and you can't necessarily see it, one thing you can do is just put a little slice in the end there, just to remember which way the grain goes, so that when you do come to slice, you know you're going to be slicing back this way. Right, now that we've trimmed the top of our brisket, we're going to turn it over and have a look at the bottom. And you'll see here that you've got a thin layer of fat here. There's not too much. We're actually not going to do a great deal with this. We're going to be cooking our fat side down, so we want to leave a thin layer of fat, maybe 2, 3, 4 mil, just to protect the meat. Often in case with barbecues, the heat source is coming from underneath. So that's the way we want to keep our fat facing the heat source. And that's why we just leave a little thin layer. If you don't like to eat it, you can cut that off when you slice your meat, but I'd recommend leaving it on during your cook. We've finished our trimming and now we're going to apply our rub. Today we're using one of my favourite beef rubs, which is the Meat Church Holy Gospel. Meat Church range, they make a really good range of rubs. You can pick those up at NZ Barbecue Supplies. So we're just going to apply a nice even coat, and you'll see there that it's got a really great colour to it. So keep a bit of height here when we're rubbing it. And that just ensures that we get an even coating. can see there's a great colour in this rub. We've applied our rub now, and we're going to let this sit here for about 45 to 60 minutes just to allow that rub to set in and the meat to sweat a little bit. And while that's happening, we'll set up our barbecue and get that ready to go. Okay, today we're going to be cooking on the ProQ, and I've got it set to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, just before I put the brisket on, one thing I will mention briefly is time and temperature, because I know it's a really common question that people ask. And it's really hard to give one answer that fits all. Everyone's cooking on different types of barbecues, with different types of fuel, with different cuts of meat of different size and different quality. So it's very hard to give a definitive answer on time and temperature. What I would say is that the best thing you can do is just to learn your barbecue, understand how it runs, and then you'll get a good idea of how long it takes to cook things. Okay, let's get this brisket on the barbecue. Right, we're going to leave that in the barbecue now, and we'll come back in about an hour and we'll just see how it's tracking. Right, our brisket's been on for 1 hour, so we're going to have a quick look and see how it's looking. You can see it's got a really nice colour there. The rub is starting to set. When I say set, what I mean is that it's not going to rub off if I scratch my fingernail on it. The rub is nice and set on the meat. It's not quite there yet, so we're going to leave it for another hour, but it is coming along really nicely. So one thing I will briefly talk about at this point is spritzing your meat. Now, the first thing is you don't want to spritz until your rub is set, because then you do run the risk of actually spritzing your rub off your meat, which isn't ideal. The other thing with spritzing too is the intent of it. So spritzing is not going to add any flavour to your meat, and it's certainly not going to moisten it from an internal standpoint. What spritzing will do is that it keeps the surface of the meat nice and moist, and that can help you get a smoke ring. So based on that, you really could just spritz with water if you wanted to. The other school of thought is that if you're spritzing with something like an apple juice or something with a high sugary content, that's going to caramelize on the surface of the meat, and it's going to help you create that nice crust and bark. But that really is your own preference, which way you go there. So we're 2.5 hours into our cook now. Our brisket's looking really good, so we're going to go ahead and wrap this now. So when do we know when to wrap our brisket, and why are we wrapping it? Now, I'm not wrapping this brisket based on any internal temperature or how long it's been in the barbecue. I'm wrapping it based on the colour and the fact that the rub is well set. So you can see there's a really nice colour on this brisket now, and also the rub is set, so it's not going to wash off. Now, there's a number of different ways that you can wrap a brisket. The way that I'm doing it today is I'm doing it in a foil tray, and I'm going to cover the top of this with tin foil. Some other common methods are boating, or just wrapping purely in tin foil, or you may also prefer to use the peach or butcher paper. That really is your preference. When I'm doing a whole brisket like this, I like to do it in the foil tray, because I think there's lots of wonderful meat juices that will come off the meat, and we want to capture that, and it's just going to help our brisket keep moist while it's wrapped and taste great as well. Now, one thing I should mention before I put this brisket back on is about the stool. And some of you might be familiar with the stool, but if you're not, what it essentially is when the internal temperature of your meat stops climbing. So if you were to have a probe in your meat and you were to graph it, you might see your internal temperature rise, it'll reach a point and level out. And that's usually around that 160 to 165 degree Fahrenheit range. Now, you can just wait the stool out, but it will likely add hours to your cook. So there's a couple of things you can do to minimise the effect of the stool. One is to cook your brisket faster, so at a higher temperature. You may still experience the stool, but it'll be for a shorter period of time. Another thing you can do is use that as a cue to wrap if you're happy with the colour and that your rub is set. Now, a wrap may not necessarily pull you straight out of a stool, but it will certainly help, and it'll get you out of it quicker. Right, so let's get this brisket back on the barbecue. And what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to use my fireboard to monitor the temperature of the brisket. And this is just going to let me know when I'm getting close to that time where I need to start probing it and checking it for doneness. Right, so it's been pretty close to 4.5 hours since we first put our brisket on. So let's have a look and see how it's going. All right, and look, you can see all that meat juice there that I was talking about. So we didn't add any stock or broth or anything like that. That has just come straight out of the brisket. So let's give it a probe. What we're looking for here is not necessarily a temperature, more a feel. So we want it to be nice and soft, like you were putting it through a block of butter. You generally find that you're around about that 205 degree Fahrenheit range. It may not be bang on that, but it'll be close. Okay, I'm pretty happy with how that's probing. It's about 208 degrees Fahrenheit internally, so we're pretty happy with that. What we're going to do now is we're going to set it aside to rest. Resting is quite important with your brisket. You do need to do that. It's been on that heat, and now that we've taken it off, we just need to let it relax a little bit and pull some of those juices back in. Now, how long you rest will be dictated a little bit by your circumstance. If you're planning on serving it immediately for dinner or lunch, then I'd just recommend getting a bath towel, wrapping it around your tray or your wrapped up brisket and placing it on a bench top for 30 odd minutes, just to let it settle out a little bit. If you've got a bit more time up your sleeve or it's done a bit early, you can do the same thing and just put it in the bottom of a chili bin or cooler, or even in a Canberra if you have one. And you can sit them there for a number of hours resting. They'll happily do that. Our brisket's been resting for about half an hour and we've just unwrapped it and taken it out. It's looking pretty good. It's got a nice bit of a jiggle there, you can see. So let's cut it open and see how she looks. Now you remember earlier on I made that little cut just to remember what the direction of the grain was coming back this way. What I'm going to do is do a nice big cut right through the middle of the point so you can see the whole lot. Now when you're slicing, I do recommend getting a good slicing knife. You can get these either with a straight edge like this one or with the serrated. I prefer the straight edge personally, but you can also use a nice chef's knife if you have one as well. Look at that. Okay, so you can actually see quite clearly there the difference between your point and your flat. The point's got a lot more internal fat or marbling in there, and the flat not quite so much. And you can also see the difference in the grain of the meat and the direction it goes. So that's quite a good illustration of that. The other thing you can notice too is we've got a nice smoke ring around here too, which is really good. That looks great. Okay, I've taken a small piece of the brisket here and I've actually selected a piece of the point because I really think that's the tastiest part of the whole brisket. What I'm going to do is I'm going to slice this up and make my favourite brisket snack, the cheese brisket toasted sandwich. You can see that really nice smoke ring on there, and you can see that I'm slicing across the grain. Alright, this is one of my favourite things to do with brisket. It's real simple, it's super delicious. We're going to make a couple of toasted sandwiches. Obviously you have to butter the outside of your bread. You lay down some pickles. Your brisket on top. Got to double down on the cheese. And then of course a splash of your favourite mustard sauce. They're a bit messy, they're not the most glamorous things in the world, but I can tell you they're delicious. So there you go, cooking a brisket. If you haven't done one before, hopefully you learned something and you feel a bit more confident about giving one a nudge. And if you have got a couple under your belt, well, you can always cook some more. In the meantime, I'm going to enjoy my favourite brisket snack and a cold beer. We'll see you next time. Cheers.